She hurled the coffee mug straight at his face. It shattered against the doorframe 2 inches from his skull, and the entire office went dead silent. 12 people had quit because of Charlotte Hayes. 12 grown adults who had mortgages, dignity, and options. He had none of those things. So he bent down, picked up the broken pieces with his bare hands, and said quietly, "Do you want me to get you a fresh cup?" That was the moment everything changed. Not for her, not yet, but for him. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves, you hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The morning it all started. Daniel Carr was sitting in his truck in the parking garage of the Hayes Financial Building, talking himself out of leaving. He'd been sitting there for 11 minutes. He knew because he kept checking the clock on his phone, the cracked one. The screen spiderwebbed in the upper corner from the time he'd dropped it, rushing Lily to the emergency room 8 months ago. He'd never fixed it. Couldn't justify the expense. Lily. He thought about her face. 7 years old, gap-toothed smile. The way she drew horses on every piece of paper she could find, even the paper bags from the grocery store. He thought about the eviction notice folded in his glove compartment. He got out of the truck. The lobby of Hayes Financial didn't feel like an office building. It felt like a museum, all glass and polished stone, the kind of place designed to make you feel small the second you walked in. Daniel walked to the reception desk in his best blazer, which wasn't saying much. He'd bought it at a Goodwill 3 years ago for his wife's funeral. He hadn't worn it since. The receptionist, a young woman named Priya, who would later tell him she genuinely liked him, from the first second looked at his name on her screen and let a flicker of something cross her face. Concern, maybe. Or pity. "You're here for the personal assistant position?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." She glanced behind her toward the elevator bank, then back at him. "Have you read the full job listing of the reviews online about the position?" "I read them," Daniel said. She studied him. "All of them?" "Yes." She seemed to want to say something else. Instead, she handed him a visitor badge and told him the 42nd floor. He found out later that 11 people had held the personal assistant role in the past 10 months. The longest anyone lasted was 6 weeks. A former military officer, 38 years old, decorated service record. He submitted his resignation via email at 2:47 in the morning and never came back for his belongings. The shortest was 4 hours and 20 minutes. A woman from Boston with an MBA from Wharton. She walked out mid-sentence during a meeting, didn't say a word to anyone, and reportedly cried in the elevator the whole way down. The position paid $95,000 a year plus benefits. Daniel made $31,000 at his current job loading freight at a distribution center. His shift started at 4 a.m. He drove 40 minutes each way on roads that froze in February, and he'd blown 2 tires in the past year alone. He needed this job the way a drowning man needs a rope. Not because he wanted it, because without it in 63 days, he and Lily would have nowhere to sleep. The elevator opened onto a floor that was quieter than it should have been for 9 a.m. Most of the desks he could see were staffed, but people moved differently up here, heads down, deliberately not making eye contact with each other. The body language of people who had learned to stay small. A man in his 50s with silver hair and reading glasses, pushed down his nose, intercepted Daniel before he'd taken 5 steps. "Daniel Carr. That's me. Gerald Owens, Operations Director. Walk with me." He didn't wait. "I want to tell you a few things before you meet Ms. Hayes, and I need you to actually listen, not just nod." "All right." Gerald stopped walking and looked at him fully for the first time. "She is brilliant. She built this company from $40,000 and a 1-bedroom apartment when she was 26 years old. She is also the hardest person you will ever work for in your entire life. She has a photographic memory. She does not forget anything. Not a number, not a promise, not a mistake. She has been through something that would have finished most people, and she is still here, still running this company, and she does not want your sympathy or your admiration. She wants competence. Do you understand? Yes." The last assistant, the one before this one, ordered her lunch 30 minutes late because of a personal phone call. She found out. He was gone by noon. Daniel nodded slowly. What happened to her, Ms. Hayes, if I can ask? Gerald looked at him the way people look at someone who's asked a question that's technically allowed but socially risky. Car accident. 4 years ago. Spinal injury. She uses a wheelchair. He paused. She does not discuss it. Ever. With anyone. Not even me, and I've worked with her for 9 years. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Gerald studied him another moment. How old's your daughter? Daniel blinked. 7. Her name's Lily. I have 4 grandkids, Gerald said, and his voice was briefly entirely different, softer, quieter, like a door opening onto something warmer. Then it closed again. Don't make this about money. She'll see through it. Just be honest about what you can do and what you can't. And if she throws something at me... Gerald didn't smile, but something moved in his expression. Duck, he said, and kept walking. Charlotte Hayes was on the phone when Daniel was shown into her office. He'd expected to wait outside. Instead, her assistant, a temporary one, a nervous-looking young man who introduced himself as just covering for today, opened the door and gestured him in. She was at her desk, her back partially to the door, turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The wheelchair was a sleek custom model, matte black, nothing institutional about it. She wore a charcoal blazer, a white silk blouse, dark trousers. Her hair was pulled back. She was 41 years old. Even sitting, even without moving, she occupied the room in a way that made the space feel like it belonged to her. I don't care what their attorney says, she was saying into the phone. Her voice was controlled, precise and cold in the way steel is cold. The filing window closes Thursday. If Morrison hasn't prepared the supplementals by tomorrow morning, pull the contract. She listened. No. That's not a threat, Alan. I don't threaten. I describe outcomes. Pull the contract. She ended the call, set the phone down, and turned to look at Daniel. She had gray eyes, not blue, genuinely gray, and the way they settled on him was direct and entirely without warmth, but also without cruelty. She was simply assessing. He stood there, didn't speak, didn't offer his hand since she hadn't moved toward him. Just waited. Sit down, she said. He sat. She rolled slightly forward, smooth the movement practiced and unconscious, and picked up a folder from the corner of her desk. His resume. She opened it with one hand and read for a moment, her eyes moving quickly. Freight distribution, she said. Before that, contracting work. Before that, construction management for 4 years. Yes. You managed a crew. 12 people peak season. Smaller crew off-season. Any college? 2 years, then I stopped. She looked up. Why? My wife got sick. I needed to work full-time. She held his gaze a beat, then looked back at the folder. Not sympathy. Not acknowledgement. Just information received, processed, filed. Previous applicants for this position had MBAs, law degrees, finance backgrounds. You have none of those things. No. So why are you applying? Because the job pays $95,000 and I'm about to lose my apartment. The room was very quiet for a moment. He watched her face to see if that had been the wrong answer. Her expression didn't change. At least you're not lying, she said. I wasn't planning to. She set the folder down. What did Gerald tell you about me? That you have a photographic memory, that you don't want sympathy, and that I should duck. Something flickered across her face, so brief he wasn't sure he'd actually seen it. The job is not glamorous. You would manage my calendar, coordinate with 6 department heads, arrange all travel, handle personal correspondence, and be available from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. 6 days a week. The 7th day, you are technically off, but you will still carry a phone. Okay. Okay, she repeated. And this time, there was something in her voice. Not quite mockery. More like disbelief that it was that simple for him. I've been starting work at 4 in the morning since I was 24, Daniel said. 6 a.m. sounds like sleeping in. She looked at him steadily. I fire people when they fail me. I don't give warnings. I don't give second chances. I give one conversation and then I move on. I understand. You say that now. I do, he said. But I also understand what happens to my daughter if I lose this chance, so I'm not going to fail you. That's what they all say. Maybe, he said. But I bet most of them had other options. She studied him for a long moment. He didn't look away. He wasn't being aggressive. He was just tired, and being tired of something has a way of stripping the fear out of it. Be here at 6 a.m. Monday, she said finally. Don't be late. Don't bring coffee unless it's black. Don't speak to me until I've spoken first. And don't look at me the way you're looking at me right now. He blinked. How am I looking at you? Like you feel sorry for me, she said flatly. Don't. I don't, he said. And it was the truth. He was looking at her the way he looked at everything that frightened him straight on, because he'd learned that looking away was always worse. I was actually thinking you remind me of a foreman I used to work for. He was ex-Marines. Everyone was terrified of him. Were you? For about a week. Then I figured out he was harder on the people he thought could take it. He paused. I learned more from him than anyone else I've ever worked for. She said nothing. Monday at 6, he said, and stood. I'll be there. He was there at 5:48. Priya was already at the front desk. She looked startled when she saw him, and then quietly, genuinely relieved, like she'd been half expecting him not to come back. She's already in, Priya said softly. Has been since 5:15. Does she always come in that early? She never leaves. Not really. Priya glanced around, then lowered her voice. I mean, she does. She goes home. But I think the office is easier for her than home is. Less I don't know. Less quiet. He thought about that on the elevator ride up. Less quiet. He understood that more than he wanted to. After Laura died, the apartment had been so quiet, it was physically painful. He'd started leaving the TV on all night, just to have some kind of sound in the rooms. Lily had started sleeping in his bed. Neither of them talked about why. The first week was a war of attrition, and Charlotte Hayes was very good at war. Monday. She sent him to retrieve a file from archives that turned out not to exist under the name she gave him. When he came back empty-handed, she gave him a look that could strip paint and said, I said the Meridian file, not the Meridian Partners file, not the Meridian Holdings file, the Meridian file. It took him 40 minutes to find the right one because the filing system was a labyrinth that nobody had bothered to document. He didn't complain. He brought it to her without explanation, set it on her desk, and went back to his station. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to. Tuesday. She rejected 3 meeting schedules he built for the following week. Not the times, the formatting. I don't want to read a paragraph. I want to read a column. Times on the left. Names in the center. Topics on the right. This isn't difficult. He rebuilt all 3 in 20 minutes and slid them back across her desk. She glanced at them, said nothing, and put them in her drawer. Wednesday. She made him sit in on a 2-hour conference call with investment partners in Frankfurt and took notes alongside him. After the call, she handed him a yellow legal pad and said, compare. His notes against hers. He'd missed 2 specific numbers, not concepts, exact numbers, that she'd recorded with perfect precision, while also managing the conversation. You'll need to be faster, she said. I know. You'll need to be more accurate. I know that too. So, what are you going to do about it? He thought about it genuinely, not defensively. I'll record the calls with your permission. I can't write as fast as you think, but I can review and fill gaps afterward and have a complete document to you within 20 minutes of any call ending. She considered this. Fine. Thursday. She threw the mug. Not at him exactly, but in his direction, which amounted to the same thing in terms of adrenal response. He'd delivered a message from the head of marketing, Ryan Calloway, who had the unfortunate habit of communicating entirely through meandering emails that buried the actual information somewhere around paragraph 4, and the message contained information Charlotte clearly already knew and found infuriating. The mug left her hand with startling velocity. He stepped to the side. It shattered against the doorframe. The floor outside went silent. He looked at the broken ceramic on the floor. He looked at her. Her jaw was tight. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. Something was happening behind her eyes that he couldn't fully read. Rage, yes, but underneath it, something rawer. Something that looked almost like fear or grief, wearing rage as a mask. He walked to the small supply closet off her office, found a dustpan, came back, and swept up the pieces. "Do you want me to get you a fresh cup?" he asked. "Get out," she said. Her voice was low. "I'll get you water instead. You haven't had anything since—" "Daniel." "Yes?" "Get out." He put the dustpan down, straightened up, and looked at her. "Okay," he said quietly, "but I'll be at my desk." He left the office, walked to his desk, sat down and opened his laptop. Gerald appeared beside him 30 seconds later, having apparently witnessed the whole thing from across the floor. "You're still here," Gerald said in a tone that was equal parts statement and question. "I work here," Daniel said, and started going through emails. Gerald stood there another moment. Then he went and got Daniel a cup of coffee and set it on the desk without a word. Friday afternoon, Charlotte called him into her office at 4:30. He expected to be fired. He walked in prepared to ask if there was any possibility of severance, not because he thought she'd say yes, but because he needed every week of income he could get to close the gap on what he owed. She was at her desk. She had a document in front of her. She pushed it across toward him. "These are the 6 department heads you'll be coordinating with." She said, her voice entirely normal, as if Thursday had not occurred. "Learn their communication preferences by end of next week. Henderson in finance responds to numbers first, explanation second. Callaway in marketing needs things in writing, or he'll claim he wasn't told. Patel in technology is the most competent person on this floor, and also the most socially oblique. If she seems annoyed with you, she's actually fine. If she seems fine with you, she's annoyed." Daniel picked up the document and read. "Voss in legal will test you," Charlotte continued. "She tests everyone. Don't argue with her on points of law. Don't agree with her just because she's intimidating. Ask her to walk you through her reasoning. She respects that. And Chen in operations. Park, anything he tells you needs to go to me on the priority list. He undervalues his own concerns. Anything he brings to you is something I need to see." And the last one, Morrison. Her expression tightened very slightly. "I handle Morrison directly." "All right." She looked at him for a moment. "You're still here," she said. "You didn't fire me," he pointed out. "It's Friday. I didn't get to it." "Is that actually what happened?" She didn't answer that. She turned back to her desk. "Monday, 6 a.m. Don't be late." 5:48, he said. She looked up. "I'm never late," he said simply. "That's the one thing I can promise you." He left the office with the document under his arm, walked to the elevator and stood there as the doors opened, and then stood there a moment longer without getting in his hand on the frame. He'd made it 1 week. And he still had a job, and he was going to get paid in 6 days, and the eviction notice in his glove compartment suddenly felt for the first time since he'd received it, like a problem he might actually be able to solve. He got in the elevator. On the way down, he called Lily. She answered on the second ring. "Daddy, can we have pancakes tonight?" "Yeah, baby," he said. "We can have pancakes tonight." He pressed his back against the elevator wall and let out a long, slow breath. 1 week down. He didn't know yet what the next one would cost him. He didn't know yet what it would give him either, but he showed up anyway. Because Daniel Carr was the kind of man who, when the elevator opened and every instinct said, "Don't get in," got in anyway. That was the only kind of man his daughter was ever going to see her father be. The second week started with a test Daniel didn't know he was taking. He arrived at 5:48 again. Priya waved at him from the desk, like he was an old friend returning from a long trip which told him everything he needed to know about how often people made it to week 2. The elevator ride up was the same, the floor was the same, but something in the air felt different, tighter, like a string pulled one notch further toward snapping. Charlotte was already on a call when he settled at his desk. He could hear her voice through the partially open door, not the words, just the tone. Controlled, precise. But underneath it something strained. He opened his laptop, pulled up the department head document she'd given him Friday, and started building contact profiles. He'd spent part of the weekend on it, not because he was trying to impress her, but because he genuinely needed the head start. Lily had been at her grandmother's Saturday afternoon, and he'd sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and his laptop and worked through everything Charlotte had told him, adding notes, cross-referencing LinkedIn profiles, reading through every email chain he'd been CC'd on during his first week. He was halfway through his notes on Henderson when Charlotte's door swung fully open. "Get Voss on the phone," she said. "Now. Tell her I need 10 minutes before her 9 o'clock." He was already dialing before she finished the sentence. Voss answered on the third ring with a voice like a closing argument. "Legal. Ms. Voss, this is Daniel Carr, Ms. Hayes's assistant. She's requesting 10 minutes with you before your 9 o'clock if you're available." A pause. "She's requesting or she's telling me?" Daniel glanced toward Charlotte's office. "I think both, ma'am." A short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. "Tell her 7 minutes. I have prep work." He walked to Charlotte's door and relayed the message. She nodded once and turned her chair back toward her desk. He was almost back to his station when she said without turning around, "You told her it was both, the request and the order." He stopped. "Yes." "Good," she said. That was it, just that one word. But from Charlotte Hayes, he was already learning one word of acknowledgement was the equivalent of a standing ovation from anyone else. By the third week, he had started to understand the rhythm of her. Not the professional rhythm that had become clear enough in the first week. It was the other rhythm he was mapping now, the one underneath the schedule. She was worse in the mornings between 6 and 8, and he eventually figured out it was because that window was when she did her physical therapy exercises, the ones she did privately in the small room off her office that she kept locked when she wasn't using it. He never asked about it. He learned to leave urgent items for after 8:15 when her voice was steadier and whatever she'd spent that early time fighting through had settled back down. She was worse on Tuesdays. He didn't know why for several weeks. Then one Tuesday he stayed late and noticed her sit for a long time staring at something on her phone before putting it face down on her desk and calling for him to reschedule the rest of the afternoon. He rescheduled without comment. She had headaches she didn't talk about. He noticed because her jaw tightened in a particular way, and she would stop making eye contact not from coldness, but from concentration, like she was managing something internal with every available resource. He started keeping ibuprofen in his desk drawer and leaving 2 tablets on the corner of her desk with a glass of water when he noticed the signs without saying anything, without making it a moment. The first time he did it, she looked at the tablets and then at him and didn't say a word, but she took them. He didn't make it a thing. That was the key. She couldn't stand being managed. She couldn't stand being handled. But she could accept practical help if it arrived without theater attached to it. It was Gerald who told him in the break room one Thursday morning that Charlotte had been engaged before the accident. Daniel hadn't asked. He almost wished Gerald hadn't told him. But once he knew, certain things rearranged themselves in his understanding of her. His name was Preston. Gerald said, refilling his coffee cup with the focused attention of a man who was telling a story he'd been carrying for a long time. VP at a bank in Boston. Handsome guy. The kind of handsome that knows it. They were together 4 years, engaged for 6 months before the accident. And he left, Daniel said. Not immediately. He stayed for about 3 months after. Doctor's consultations, all of it. Then one morning he was just gone. Left a letter. I never read it. She never mentioned it. Gerald took a sip of his coffee. She came back to work 8 weeks later. I thought we all thought that she'd take more time. She didn't. She came back and she was harder than she'd been before, and I think some people misunderstood what that hardness was. What was it? Daniel asked. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Armor? He said finally. When you've been left by someone who was supposed to stay, you build something to make sure nobody can do it again. You make yourself difficult enough that the only people who remain are the ones who genuinely have no choice but to deal with you, or the ones who are too stubborn to leave. He glanced at Daniel. Present company apparently included. Daniel stared at his coffee. He wasn't thinking about Charlotte just then. He was thinking about himself, about the way he'd thrown himself into 60-hour weeks after Laura died, about the way he'd rearranged every single thing in his life until there was no space left in it for anything that wasn't necessary. About how much easier it was to be exhausted than to be still. "She's going to test you harder," Gerald said, "not to break you. She doesn't know how to do it any other way. But she's paying attention to whether you stay." "I'm staying," Daniel said. "I know," Gerald said. "That's the part that's going to scare her." The test came on a Friday afternoon in the 5th week. Charlotte sent him to retrieve documents from a storage unit the company maintained across town, physical files, pre-digital, from the company's first 3 years. She needed 3 specific binders. She gave him the unit number, the access code, and a handwritten list of what to look for. He drove across town, found the storage facility, punched in the code, and walked into a unit that contained what appeared to be the entire paper trail of a decade of business operations stacked in no discernible order across metal shelving that reached the ceiling. He called her. She picked up on the second ring. "Did you find them?" "I'm in the unit. I need to ask about the filing system." "There is no filing system." He looked at the shelves. "I see that. The binders are red. The labels should be on the spine. You're looking for Meridian Initial Meridian Draft 2 and the one labeled only with a date March 2009. How long do I have?" "I need them by 4. It was 2:20. "Okay." He hung up and started working through the shelves methodically, left to right, top to bottom. It was hot in the unit and dusty, and his back started aching around shelf 4. He found the first binder at 2:48, the second at 3:05. The third was not where it should have been, or where anything should have been given the state of the shelving, and he spent 19 minutes checking every red binder on every shelf before finding it slid behind a box of receipts from 2011. He was back at the building at 3:52. He walked off the elevator at 3:57 and put all 3 binders on Charlotte's desk at 3:59. She looked at the clock, then at the binders. She opened the third one, March 2009, and checked something inside, then closed it. "The unit needs to be reorganized," she said. "I know. I can do that Saturday if you want." She looked up at him. "You'd come in on a Saturday for that." "It needs doing," he said. "And my daughter's with her grandmother this weekend." Something shifted in Charlotte's expression, not dramatically, not in a way most people would have caught. But Daniel was starting to learn her face the way he'd learned other difficult things in his life, by paying close attention over time, and what he saw was something that looked almost like she didn't know what to do with that answer. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to. The filing system is a liability. You shouldn't have to send someone on a 2-hour search every time you need a document." She was quiet for a moment. "Fine," she said. "I'll have Priya get you the access code for the weekend." He nodded and turned to go. "Daniel." He stopped. "You had 3 minutes to spare," she said. "I know." "You could have called ahead, told me you were going to make it." "I didn't know for sure until I had all 3 binders in my hand," he said. "I don't tell people things I'm not certain of." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to her desk. "Go home," she said. "It's Friday." The Saturday in the storage unit was unexpectedly clarifying. He spent 6 hours reorganizing the files chronologically, then alphabetically, by project within each year, and somewhere around hour 3, going through binders from 2008 and 2009, he got an accidental window into who Charlotte Hayes had been before the accident. Not from anything personal, from the work itself. She'd been 26 when she started the company. The early documents were handwritten in places her handwriting, neat and fast. The margins were full of notes, calculations, questions to herself. The volume of work was staggering. She'd been running on almost nothing. He could see it in the dates, back-to-back filings and meetings and correspondence, barely a gap in any of it. She'd built this from $40,000 and a one-bedroom apartment, like Gerald said. And the proof of it was here in these boxes and binders, in the handwriting and the hours and the sheer unreasonable ambition of what she'd attempted and then actually done. He sat with that for a while, surrounded by the paper trail of her, and he thought about what Gerald had said about armor. About what happens when you build your whole identity around something and then someone or something tries to take it from you. He thought about Laura, about the way he'd felt in those first months after she was gone. Not just sad, not just grieving, but deeply, terrifyingly uncertain about who he was when she wasn't there. Because so much of who he'd understood himself to be had been in relation to her. He thought Charlotte Hayes probably understood that feeling better than most people. He finished the reorganization at 3:30, locked the unit, and drove home. Lily would be back by 5. He had time to shower and get groceries and make something real for dinner. He didn't tell Charlotte about the documents he'd found. He didn't make a moment of it. He just emailed her a simple, organized inventory of the unit's contents and left it at that. She replied at 11 p.m. with 2 words, "Efficient. Thank you." He stared at those 2 words for longer than he wanted to admit. It was in the 6th week that she said something that stopped him cold. He'd brought her a revised travel itinerary for a conference in Chicago. She was due to present to a group of institutional investors, and the original schedule had her in transit for nearly 5 hours each way, on a route that made no sense geographically. He'd rebuilt it, cutting the travel time in half with a direct flight and a hotel closer to the venue. She looked at the new itinerary without speaking for almost a full minute. "The previous assistant booked this route," she said finally. "I know, I found the original booking." "Did you wonder why she used that route instead of this one?" He had wondered. He'd also figured it out. The original route went through 2 hub cities and used the airline that the company had a corporate account with the account that existed because the CFO's brother-in-law had negotiated it 3 years ago, and the contract was essentially untouchable. "Because of the corporate account," he said. "Yes." "The direct flight is $400 more." "Yes." He looked at her. "But it's better for you," he said simply. "Less time in transit, less disruption to your schedule, better for your—" He stopped himself just short of "for your physical comfort," which he knew she'd reject. "Better operationally," he finished. She looked at him for a long moment. "Book the direct flight," she said. "Okay? And don't make it a thing." "I won't." "You're already making it a thing." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just standing here." "You're standing there with a look on your face." "What look?" "Like you just figured something out about me that you think matters." He kept his expression neutral. "I'm just thinking about the Chicago itinerary," he said. She gave him a look that said she didn't entirely believe him. But she let it go. "Book it," she said, "and add 30 minutes before the presentation. I need time to—" A pause, just a fraction of a second. "To prepare." "Done," he said, and he left before she could accuse him of having another look on his face. By the end of the 2nd month, 3 things had happened that nobody in the office could quite explain. The first was that Charlotte stopped throwing things. Not officially, nobody made an announcement, but the mug incident had been the last of its kind, and the floor had noticed. The second was that she started leaving her office door open more often. Not always, not even usually, but sometimes in the late afternoon when the floor had mostly quieted, and there was just the hum of the building's systems and the occasional sound of a keyboard, the door would stay open, like she didn't need the wall as much as she used to. The third was that she started asking him questions that had nothing to do with work. Not personal questions exactly, more like testing the edges of the boundary, finding out where it was. "Your daughter," she said one afternoon while he was standing at her desk going over the next day's schedule. "What is she like?" He looked up from the calendar. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what is she like? As a person?" He thought about it honestly. "She's convinced that horses are the solution to most problems," he said. "She draws them everywhere. She asked her teacher if she could do her book report on a horse, and the teacher said the book report had to be about a book, and Lily said there are books about horses, and apparently the conversation went on for a while. He watched Charlotte's face. Something moved across it almost imperceptibly, but it was there. Like a window opening a crack. "Is she stubborn?" Charlotte asked. "Extremely." "Where does she get that from?" It wasn't quite a question. He smiled, couldn't help it. "I have no idea," he said. And Charlotte Hayes, for the first time in the 2 months he'd worked for her, almost smiled back. He didn't make a thing of it. He looked back down at the calendar and kept talking about the Tuesday briefing, and she let the moment close quietly, naturally, the way good things sometimes do when you don't reach for them too hard. But he felt it. And he was pretty sure she did too. The almost smile lasted exactly 4 days before everything collapsed. It was a Tuesday, and Daniel had learned enough by now to know that Tuesdays carried a particular weight for her, a density that the other days of the week didn't have. He'd never asked why. He'd just learned to read the morning the way a sailor reads weather, watching for the signs that told him how much space to give her and how carefully to move through the hours. That Tuesday started like the others. He was at his desk by 5:48. Charlotte was already in. The door to her office was closed, which wasn't unusual for early morning, and he could hear the low murmur of her voice through it, a call, or maybe just the news on her laptop. He made coffee, pulled up the day's schedule, and was halfway through reviewing a contract summary Henderson had sent over when Priya appeared at the elevator with a look on her face that made his stomach drop before she'd said a single word. Priya didn't rattle easily. She'd worked the front desk of Hayes Financial for 6 years, which meant she'd seen things that would have sent most people looking for a new career. But she looked rattled, now pale in a specific way, like she'd read something that hadn't fully landed yet. "There's something on page 6, she said quietly, setting her phone on the edge of his desk so he could see the screen. He read it. Preston Whitmore, 5P of Strategic Acquisitions at Beacon Capital, and former fiancé of Hayes Financial. CEO. Charlotte Hayes announced his engagement this weekend to New York socialite Margot Ellison. The couple confirmed the news at a private dinner in the Hamptons. Whitmore and Hayes ended their engagement following Hayes's spinal injury in a 2020 automobile accident. Daniel read it twice. Then he set the phone down and looked at Priya. "Does she know?" he asked. "I don't know. I just saw it." He glanced toward the closed office door. The murmur on the other side had stopped. "Go back to the desk," he said quietly. "Don't mention it to anyone." Priya nodded and left. Daniel sat very still for a moment, his hand resting on his keyboard without pressing anything. He was running the math in his head, not because he thought there was a right answer, but because he needed a second to think before he acted. Did he go in? Did he wait? Did he pretend he hadn't seen it and let the morning proceed, and hope she didn't notice the way people were looking at their phones, and then quickly looking away? He was still deciding when her door opened. She came out, moving faster than usual, her chair quick and precise, the way it was when she was in full professional mode, all efficiency and forward momentum. She had a folder in her lap and her phone pressed to her ear, and she was talking before she'd fully cleared the doorway. "Tell Morrison I want the Hartwell numbers on my desk by noon, not end of day noon. And if he gives you the time zone excuse again, I want to hear about it directly." She stopped, not because of anything Daniel did. He was just sitting at his desk, expression neutral, looking at her the way he always looked at her, straight on, waiting for direction. But she stopped anyway. And he knew from the way her eyes moved to his face, and then very briefly away, and then back again, that she had already seen it. Probably before Priya had. Probably before anyone. She ended the call. "Reschedule my 10 o'clock, she said. "To when?" "To never." She moved toward her office. "And clear the afternoon." "You have the Hartwell call at 2? Clear it." "Charlotte?" She stopped. He never used her first name. In 3 months, he had not once called her anything but Ms. Hayes. The word landed between them like something fragile dropped on a hard floor. She didn't turn around. "Clear the afternoon," she said, and her voice was very controlled and very quiet, which was worse somehow than if she'd shouted. Please. He cleared the afternoon. For 2 hours her door stayed closed. He answered emails. He fielded calls. He told Henderson that the Hartwell review would need to be rescheduled and deflected Henderson's 3 follow-up questions with the practiced patience of a man who'd learned that most of what people called urgency was actually just anxiety dressed up in a deadline. At 11:30, Gerald appeared at his elbow. How bad is it? Gerald asked, not bothering to pretend he didn't know what they were talking about. I don't know yet, Daniel said. She's been in there since 8:30. Has she eaten anything? No. Gerald looked at the closed door. Preston Whitmore is a particular kind of person, he said in the tone of a man carefully selecting words that were legally defensible. The kind who needs to be the most important thing in every room. When Charlotte got hurt and the room changed when she became the story and the center of attention for reasons that had nothing to do with him, he couldn't manage it. Daniel didn't say anything. He left her a letter, Gerald continued. She read it once. I know because she called me into her office that morning and asked me to review a board presentation she'd been working on. And when I came in, she'd clearly been crying, which I have never seen before or since, and the letter was on the desk. She closed the folder over it before I could read anything. We spent 2 hours on the board presentation. She never mentioned the letter. I never mentioned the letter. That was 4 years ago. The office door opened. Charlotte came out. She had her coat on, which she never wore inside, and her bag in her lap, which meant she was leaving also, something she never did in the middle of the day. The professional mask was in place, but it was sitting slightly wrong, the way a picture hangs crooked, and you can't stop noticing it, even when you're trying not to look. I'm going home, she said. Forward anything essential. Okay, Daniel said. She moved toward the elevator. He stood. Do you need... He started. No, she said. The elevator doors opened. She went in. The doors closed. He stood there a moment. Then he sat back down, pulled up his phone, and typed a text to his mother-in-law. Can you pick up Lily today? I might be late. He didn't leave. He stayed at his desk and worked through the afternoon, and at 4:15, his phone rang, and it was Charlotte's personal cell number, which she had given him for work emergencies only, and which had never appeared on his screen before outside of business hours. He answered immediately. Yes. The Hartwell numbers. Her voice was steady, but slightly rough at the edges, like something had been sanded down without being fully smoothed. Henderson sent them. An hour ago. I can email them to you. Do that. A pause. He sent the email while they were still on the line. He heard the soft notification on her end. Did anything else come in? She asked. Voss called about the Meridian filing. I told her you'd call her tomorrow morning. Calloway sent 3 emails that are all essentially the same email. And Chen flagged something from the operations side that I think you should see, but it's not urgent. It can wait until tomorrow. Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel, she said. Yes. You didn't ask me if I was all right. He thought about how to answer that. I figured you'd tell me if there was something I needed to know, he said. A long silence. You're the only person, she said slowly, who doesn't look at me like I'm about to break. You're not about to break, he said. You don't know that. I know you cleared your afternoon, which is the first time you've done that in 3 months. And I know you went home, which I've never seen you do before 4:30, so I know you're not fine. He paused. But I also know you called me at 4:15 to ask about the Hartwell numbers when you could have just emailed. So I know you're not broken either. The silence this time felt different. Less like emptiness, and more like someone standing in a doorway, one hand on the frame not quite ready to step through. I'll be in tomorrow at 6, she said. I'll be there at 5:48, he said. She hung up. She was there the next morning. Her face was composed, and her schedule was in motion before he'd finished his first coffee, and she didn't mention Tuesday, and he didn't either. But something had shifted subtly, the way a weight redistributes itself when you've been carrying it long enough and finally adjust your grip. She worked harder that week than he'd seen her work since he'd started. Harder in a way that looked less like ambition and more like she was running from something by staying in forward motion, which he understood completely, because he'd done the same thing for a year and a half after Laura died, and it worked mostly until it didn't. The board crisis broke on a Thursday. He found out the way. He found out most things not from Charlotte, but from the signals around her. Gerald coming in with his jaw set and his eyes sharp. Voss in legal, calling 3 times in an hour, each time sounding slightly less controlled than the last. A meeting appearing on Charlotte's calendar with no subject line, and 5 names he'd never seen before, all of them C-suite, adjacent from the parent structure above Hayes Financial. He was putting together her briefing materials for the mystery meeting when Charlotte came out of her office and said without preamble, "Close the door." He followed her in, closed the door behind him, and sat down across from her desk without being asked. 3 members of the board are moving to initiate a leadership review, she said. Her voice was flat and factual, like she was reading a weather report. A formal vote on whether I should remain as CEO. They've been talking to investors. 3 of my largest institutional partners are reconsidering their positions. He absorbed this. When did this start? The conversation started before I knew about them, which tells you something about how far along it is. The formal motion was filed yesterday. Why? He said. The company's numbers. The company's numbers are strong, she said. This isn't about numbers. She looked at him steadily. This is about the perception that I'm diminished. That the accident created a leadership liability. There is a faction on this board that has believed this since I came back to work 4 years ago. And they have been patient, and they have waited for a moment of apparent vulnerability, and they have decided this is it. The anger that moved through him was fast and clean, and he didn't show it because she wasn't looking for his anger. She was looking for his thinking. Who's leading it? He asked. A man named Garrison. He's been on the board since before I took over. He's always believed that a company like this should be run by a certain kind of person, and I don't fit the profile. She said it without bitterness, which was somehow more devastating than if she'd been angry. He's not wrong that I've been distracted. The last 2 weeks, she stopped. The last 2 weeks you were dealing with something personal, he said. That doesn't constitute a leadership failure. It doesn't matter what it constitutes. It matters what it looks like. Then we change what it looks like, he said. She studied him. We. Yes. He met her eyes. That's what I'm here for. You're here to manage my calendar and coordinate with department heads. I'm here to make sure things work, he said. Right now, the most important thing that needs to work is keeping you in your chair. He stopped himself, realized the unintended double meaning, and pressed forward without acknowledging it, because she'd hate it if he made it awkward. Keeping you in the CEO position. So tell me what you need. The look she gave him was long and searching, like she was looking for the angle, the thing underneath. The offer, the reason that was really there. He knew she was doing it. He let her look. I need a full investor communication strategy in 72 hours, she said finally. I need to present to the board with enough data and enough confidence that Garrison's motion looks like what it actually is, a personal campaign dressed up as corporate governance. Okay, he said. Who do you trust on the board besides yourself? 2 people, Hendricks and Park. They'll hold their votes if I give them reason to. And the institutional investors. The 3 that are reconsidering. I need personal calls, not emails, not presentations. Personal calls where I talk to them directly, and they hear my voice, and they remember that they backed this company because of me, not despite me. He was already writing. I'll build the outreach schedule tonight. First call tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. I'll have it ready by 6. He stood. And Charlotte. He used her name again, deliberate this time. She looked up at him. Garrison is betting that the last 2 weeks broke something in you. The best thing you can do is show up to that board meeting looking like the last 2 weeks made you sharper. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her expression, not the almost smile from before, something more complicated than that. Something that looked like a person standing at the edge of something they've been afraid of for a long time and deciding maybe to look down. You're very certain of things, she said. Not everything, he said. But some things. Like what? Like the fact that you built this company once from nothing when you had every reason not to. You can do it again. Her jaw tightened, not in anger this time. He was starting to be able to tell the difference. That was before, she said. Before what? He said. Not gently, not harshly. Just directly the way Gerald had said she needed someone who didn't look at her like she was about to break. Before the accident. She didn't answer. The company's still here, he said. You're still here. The accident didn't take those things. It took other things, and I know that matters. I know it matters more than I understand. But the part of you that built this, that's still in the room. I'm looking at it right now. The silence that followed was one of the most complete he'd ever sat inside. Then Charlotte Hayes, who had not cried in front of another human being in 4 years. Not since the morning Gerald had walked in, and she'd closed the folder over the letter before he could see, pressed her lips together very tightly, and looked at the corner of her desk and breathed carefully through her nose. He didn't say anything. He didn't move toward her. He didn't make it a moment. He just stayed in the room. After a while, she looked back up. Her eyes were clear. Her expression was rebuilt into something close to composed. "The investor calls," she said. "Have the schedule ready by 6. "Yes," he said. "And Daniel." He stopped at the door. "I'm not going to say thank you," she said. "Because you're going to tell me it's your job, and I'm going to tell you it isn't. And we're going to waste 3 minutes on a conversation that doesn't change anything." "Okay," he said. "So I'm just going to say..." She paused. 6 a.m. "I'll be there at 5:48, he said. He left the office. He walked to his desk, sat down, and opened a new document. He had a communication strategy to build, and about 12 hours to build it, and his hands were very steady on the keyboard. He'd been terrified of losing this job 3 months ago because of what it meant for Lily, for the apartment, for the life he was trying desperately to hold together. He was still those things. He was still that man. But something else had happened in these 3 months. Something he hadn't budgeted for. Something that didn't fit neatly into the category of employment or obligation or even duty. He had started to care what happened to her. Not out of pity. She'd made sure that was impossible. Not out of admiration, though there was that too. Something quieter and more complicated. The kind of caring that happens when you've spent enough time close to someone's real life. Not the version they perform for the world, but the actual one underneath. And you've seen the places where they're trying and struggling and holding on, and something in you simply refuses to look away. He didn't examine it too closely. He just let it make him better at his job and opened the document and started to work. The investor calls went better than anyone had a right to expect. Daniel had the schedule built by 5:50 a.m. 20 minutes before Charlotte arrived, and when she came in and saw the 3-page document on her desk color-coded by investor priority, with talking points tailored to each firm's specific concerns, and a 1-paragraph briefing on each contact's communication style, she sat with it for a long moment without speaking. "How did you know Birchfield Partners responds better to revenue trajectory than market position?" she asked finally. "I read their last 4 earnings calls," he said. "Their analysts always lead with growth curve questions, never with competitive landscape. It tells you what they're actually worried about." She looked at him over the document. "You read 4 earnings calls last night." "I also read the board charter and Garrison's last 3 shareholder letters," he said. "Do you want the short version of what I found in those?" She set the document down. "Tell me." Garrison uses the word stability 11 times across those 3 letters. Not growth, not performance. Stability. He's been building a narrative for at least 2 years that positions you as a volatility risk. The board motion isn't opportunistic, it's the end of a long campaign. He paused. "Which means it's also been anticipated by you." She was very still. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're not surprised," he said. "You were upset, but you weren't surprised. And you already know what you're going to say at that board meeting. You've been thinking about it for longer than this week." She held his gaze for a moment, and then, for the first time in 5 months of working together, She let him be right without any qualification attached to it. "Sit down," she said. "Walk me through the call order." They spent 40 minutes preparing. Not him briefing her, that would have been absurd, like coaching a championship boxer on the fundamentals of throwing a punch. It was more like sparring. He raised objections. She answered them. He pushed back. She refined. By the time the first call was scheduled to begin, she was sharper than he'd seen her, the way a blade gets sharper when you run it against something with the right resistance. The first call lasted 22 minutes. He sat at the small table in the corner of her office taking notes and watched her work. She was extraordinary on the phone. He'd seen her competence in meetings and documents, in the way she managed the 42nd floor, with the precision of a conductor who knew every instrument and its exact capacity. But this was different. This was her, at the very center of what she did, building trust, through voice alone, with investors who'd been spooked and needed to be brought back without ever feeling managed or handled. She didn't plead. She didn't perform. She laid out data. She spoke about the company's trajectory with the specificity of someone who had built every piece of it with her own hands. And when the investor on the other end raised the question that was underneath all the others, the question about her, about leadership continuity, about whether the person at the helm was the person they'd invested in, she answered it in a way that made Daniel go still. "I've built this company through a recession, through 2 market corrections, and through the worst period of my personal life," she said. Her voice was even and clear. "I'm not going to tell you the last 4 years have been easy. They haven't been. But I want you to look at what those 4 years produced: the margins, the client retention, the expansion into 2 new verticals. And then I want you to ask yourself whether that looks like diminished leadership to you. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the hardest I've ever worked." Silence on the other end. Then, "Charlotte, nobody's questioning your work ethic." "No," she said, not unkindly, but with absolute clarity. "They're questioning my body, and I think you and I both know that those are not the same thing." Another silence. "Book the quarterly review," the investor said finally. "My team will be there." She ended the call and sat for a moment without moving. Then she looked at Daniel. He wasn't going to make it a thing. He looked down at his notepad. "Second call in 8 minutes," he said. "Meridian Capital. Their lead partner is named Zhao. You've met him twice: Chicago in 2022, the Atlanta conference last spring." "He plays chess?" she said, and rolled toward her desk. "Seriously, competitively. He thinks in endgames." "Then skip the setup and go straight to the conclusion," Daniel said. "He'll respect it." She picked up the phone. "Yes," she said. "He will." 3 days later, she asked him about Lily. Not in passing, the way she had before, the quick question at the end of a conversation, contained and bounded. This was different. They were reviewing the board presentation together, Charlotte at her desk and Daniel in the chair across from her, and they'd reached the end of the material, and instead of dismissing him, she just sat there for a moment, with her hands folded on the desk, and said, "How old is she now?" 7, he said. "She'll be 8 in March." "What does she like besides horses?" He thought about it. "She likes building things. Legos, but she won't follow the instructions. She has to design it herself, or she loses interest. She likes her teacher, which is a relief, because last year's teacher was—" He stopped, edited himself. "A different experience. She likes the color green. Not because it's her favorite color, she explained to me very carefully, but because it's the most useful color and she's a practical person." Charlotte was watching him with an expression he'd never seen on her before. Open, unguarded in a way that had nothing to do with being caught off guard and everything to do with choosing it. "She sounds like someone I'd want to meet," Charlotte said. And then she heard herself say it, and something shifted, the openness pulling back slightly, like she'd moved faster than she'd intended. Daniel didn't reach for it. "She'd probably try to show you her horse drawings," he said. "Fair warning. I like horses," Charlotte said. He looked up. "Do you?" "I rode until I was 22, she said. It came out simply without apparent weight, but he understood that it carried a great deal of it. He understood that a person who had ridden horses until she was 22 and now could not and had not mentioned this fact in 5 months to the person she spoke with more than anyone else in her daily life, had just given him something that cost her something, Lily would lose her mind, he said quietly. Charlotte almost smiled. Not almost, she did smile briefly, and it transformed her face the way sunlight through a window transforms a room. Then it was gone, but it had been there. He'd seen it. "Go home," she said. "You've been here since 6. So have you. I own the company. It's different. I'm going to tell Gerald you said that. Gerald has known me for 9 years, and he still does whatever I tell him to do," she said. "Go home. Tell your daughter something from me." He stood and gathered his things. "What should I tell her?" Charlotte considered for a moment. "Tell her that practical people who pick useful colors over pretty ones are usually the most interesting people in any room." He smiled at that, a real one, wide enough that he didn't bother trying to control it. "She'll want to know who said it. Tell her someone who used to ride horses." He was at the door when she said Daniel. He stopped. "The board meeting is Thursday. I want you in the room." He turned around. In 5 months, she had never invited him into a board meeting. "As your assistant. As someone who's read Garrison's shareholder letters and knows what he's been building," she said. "I'd like you in the room." "I'll be there," he said. 5 minutes early, she said. "Obviously," he said. He told Lily that night at dinner, while she was pushing peas around her plate in the specific pattern she made when she was thinking hard about something, that he'd been invited to a very important meeting by his boss. Lily looked up. The one who threw the cup. He'd mentioned the mug incident. He realized in a moment of parental candor he now slightly regretted. "That's the one." Did she throw any more cups? No. Lily processed this. Is she still mean? He thought about the investor calls, about the way Charlotte had said they're questioning my body with that absolute unashamed clarity, about the horse riding, about tell her that practical people who pick useful colors are usually the most interesting people in any room. "She's hard," he said. "There's a difference." Lily seemed to accept this with the philosophical flexibility of someone who'd had difficult teachers and understood the distinction on a practical level. "Can I come see your office sometime?" "Maybe," he said. "I want to show her my horse drawings." He looked at his daughter, at her gap-toothed face and her pea arrangement and the complete uncomplicated certainty with which she moved through the world, and felt a wave of something so large he couldn't name it. Love, yes. But also something else. Gratitude, maybe. That she was still this easy to be around, still this light after the years they'd had. "Maybe," he said again. "Let me ask." He did ask. He wasn't sure what made him do it. Something in the conversation about the horses, maybe, or the way Charlotte had said someone I'd want to meet before pulling it back. He brought it up on a Wednesday casual, slipping it into the end of a schedule review, the way he'd learned to deliver things that required careful landing. "Lily has a school event on Friday afternoon," he said. "She gets out at noon. My mother-in-law usually covers when I'm working, but she has a doctor's appointment. I'll figure out a solution. I just wanted to let you know I might need to step out to make a call around 12:30. Charlotte looked at him. "Bring her here." He blinked. "Here. To the office. She can sit at the table in my conference room. There's Wi-Fi, and I assume she has something to occupy herself. She has her sketchbook," he said slowly. "Then bring her." "Charlotte, she's 7. I'm aware of her age. You've told me. Bring her." A pause. "Unless you think it's a bad idea." He thought about Lily in a boardroom horse drawings spreading across a conference table. He thought about Charlotte's face when she'd almost smiled. "I think," he said carefully, "that it's either going to be a very good idea or a very memorable disaster. Most things that matter are one or the other," Charlotte said, and turned back to her screen. Lily arrived at Hayes Financial at 12:40 on Friday, holding her sketchbook against her chest, with both arms wearing a green sweater, the most useful color, and looking around the lobby with the alert cataloging attention of a person determined not to miss anything. She took Daniel's hand without being asked. He noticed that. She hadn't done that in public in months. She was 7. and 7-year-olds had opinions about holding hands in public. But something about the building made her reach for him, and he held on. Priya, who had been briefed, gave Lily a visitor badge and said solemnly, "I love your sweater." And Lily said, "Thank you. Green is the most useful color." And Priya caught Daniel's eye over Lily's head with an expression that said everything. The elevator, the 42nd floor, the conference room, which was large and quiet and had a view that made Lily go to the window immediately and press her palm against the glass. "Dad," she said, "you can see so far." "I know. Do you see this every day?" "Every day." She turned around and looked at him with an expression of deep, genuine concern. "And you don't get distracted?" "I try very hard not to," he said, and she accepted this as a reasonable answer and went to the table and opened her sketchbook. He left her there with a sandwich from the cafe downstairs and went back to his desk. 20 minutes later, he heard a voice from the direction of Charlotte's office that he recognized as Lily's, and his whole body went tense. He was out of his chair before he'd made a conscious decision to stand. Charlotte's office door was open. Lily was standing in the doorway, not inside, just in the doorway, which suggested she had some instinct about the line even at 7, holding her sketchbook open to a drawing of a horse. A very detailed horse in green, because of course. Charlotte was at her desk, and she was looking at the drawing. "That's a Frisian," Charlotte said. "The mane is right. Most people draw it wrong." Lily's face did something extraordinary. The full, uncomplicated joy of a child who has just been seen exactly as she is. "How do you know? I used to ride them. Frisians are very dramatic horses. They know how beautiful they are." Lily stepped 1 foot into the office. "Do you have a horse now?" A fraction of a pause. "No." "Why not?" Daniel was about to intervene to say, "Lily, come on, don't," when Charlotte said, "Because my life is different now than it used to be." Lily thought about this with complete seriousness. Then she said, "My life is different too. My mom died." The silence that followed was one of the most complete Daniel had ever experienced. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He watched Charlotte's face. "I know," Charlotte said quietly. "Your dad told me." "Do you think she can still see me?" Lily asked, with no drama. With the simple, earnest directness of a child asking a question she genuinely needed an answer to. Charlotte looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "I do." "Me too," Lily said. She held out the sketchbook. "Do you want this one? You can have it. I can draw another." Charlotte took the drawing. She looked at it for a moment, then set it carefully on the corner of her desk where it would stay. Daniel would later discover for the remainder of his time working there. "Thank you," she said. "It's the nicest thing I've been given in a long time." "You're welcome," Lily said, and stepped back out of the office with the easy finality of a child who had accomplished what she came to do and went back to the conference room. Daniel stood there, unable to quite move. Charlotte looked in the drawing. Then she looked at him, and her expression was something he had no name for. Not the professional mask, not the almost smile, not the composed steadiness she showed the board and the investors and the world. Something underneath all of that. Something that looked like a person who has been somewhere very cold for a very long time and has just for one unguarded moment felt something warm. "She's remarkable," Charlotte said. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She really is." "Go back to work," Charlotte said. But her voice was different, quieter, softer at the edges, like the sanding had finally reached something that could actually be smoothed. He went back to his desk. He sat down. He put his hands on the keyboard, and for a moment he didn't type anything. He just sat there thinking about the horse drawing on the corner of Charlotte's desk, and Lily asking, "Do you think she can still see me?" and Charlotte saying, "Yes, I do," with a certainty that hadn't sounded like comfort. It had sounded like truth. The board meeting was on Thursday, and it was one of the most tense 2 hours Daniel had ever spent in a room. He sat against the wall behind Charlotte, which was where assistants sat, visible enough to be useful, removed enough to be ignorable. He watched Garrison across the long table, a man in his late 60s, with the particular confidence of someone who had never once in his life had his right to be in a room questioned. He watched Garrison watch Charlotte, and he recognized the calculation in that watching the assessment of weakness, the search for the crack. He watched Charlotte not give him one. She presented for 40 minutes without notes. Not because she'd memorized a script, because she knew the company, the way she knew her own hands, every number and narrative and trajectory and decision point. And she laid it out with the precision and confidence of someone who had built this thing and knew exactly what it was made of. When Garrison spoke, his voice was measured and collegial, and deeply carefully condescending. No one questions your dedication, Charlotte, but the board has a responsibility to consider long-term resilience. Leadership transitions, when managed properly, can— Garrison, Charlotte said, not loudly, but with a finality that stopped him mid-sentence as cleanly as a wall stops a ball. I've been running this company for 15 years. In that time, we've tripled revenue, doubled our client base, and survived 2 market corrections that eliminated 3 of our closest competitors. If you'd like to have a conversation about long-term resilience, I welcome that conversation. But let's have it about the numbers, not about me personally. Unless you'd like to specify on the record exactly what leadership concern you're referring to. The room was very quiet. Garrison did not specify. The motion failed. 7 votes to 3 with 2 abstentions. Garrison sat with his hands flat on the table, his face arranged into something neutral that did not reach his eyes, and Daniel watched him from his chair against the wall and felt something he recognized from his construction days, the particular feeling of a well-placed beam holding exactly what it was designed to hold. After the meeting, when the room had cleared and it was just the 2 of them, Charlotte at the head of the table, Daniel gathering his notepad, she sat very still for a moment, her hands in her lap, looking at nothing. "Are you all right?" he asked. She took a breath. "Yes," she said. Then, "No." Then, "I don't know?" "Both." "That's allowed," he said. She looked at him. "He's been trying to do that for 2 years, maybe longer." "I know, and it almost worked. Not because of him, because I almost let it, because for 3 weeks I almost believed the story he was telling about me." She paused. "The accident story, the diminished story." "But you didn't," he said. "You didn't let me," she said. He shook his head. "I didn't do anything you weren't already doing. I just stayed in the room while you did it." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something he had never seen her do, not once in 6 months. She reached out and put her hand briefly over his, just for a second, just one light touch, and then she pulled it back and looked at the table and said, "Go get me some coffee. The real kind, not the break room kind." "Yes, Ms. Hayes," he said. And he went. The coffee he brought her was from the place 3 blocks down that she'd mentioned exactly once in passing. 4 months ago, a comment so brief, he almost hadn't caught it. Something about the beans being the only ones in the neighborhood worth the price. He'd noted it the way he noted everything about her, not because he was keeping score, but because paying attention was simply the way he operated, and she accepted the cup without comment, which was its own kind of comment. The weeks that followed the board meeting were quieter, not empty. Hayes Financial didn't do empty. There was always a filing or a negotiation or a Callaway email that was really 3 emails pretending to be one, but quieter in the way a room gets quieter after a storm has moved through, and you realize the walls are still standing. Something had settled. Not resolved exactly. Settled. Like ground after a long rain, firmer than before. Garrison remained on the board. He had to. The bylaws were what they were. But he had lost something in that room on Thursday that he wasn't going to recover, and everyone in the building understood it without anyone saying it directly, which was the particular way of things. In places like Hayes Financial, where the important communications were always the ones that weren't written down. Charlotte worked differently after that. Still hard, that would never change. It was too fundamental to who she was, like asking a river to move slower through a canyon. It had carved itself. But there was something different in the quality of the work, less like running from something and more like moving toward it. Daniel noticed because Daniel noticed everything about her. That was no longer just his job. It had stopped being just his job, somewhere around the time Lily handed over a green horse drawing and asked a question no 7-year-old should have to know how to ask, and Charlotte had answered it like she meant it. It was Gerald who told him about the therapy. Not the physical therapy Daniel had known about that for months had built his entire morning schedule around. It had learned every sign that told him when it had been a hard session versus a productive one. This was different. A new therapist. Someone Charlotte had apparently started seeing in the weeks after the board meeting, a woman named Dr. Reeves, whose office was in Midtown, and whose specialty, Gerald said carefully, was psychological recovery following traumatic physical events. She hasn't seen anyone like that since the first year, Gerald said. They were in the break room again, their habitual spot for conversations that couldn't happen in the open. After the accident, she tried 2 different therapists in the first 18 months and quit both of them. Why? Daniel asked. She said they kept treating her like a tragedy. Gerald looked at his coffee cup. Her words. She didn't want to be treated like a tragedy. She wanted to be treated like a person who had a problem to solve, and apparently neither of them could do that for her. And this one can. She's still going, Gerald said. 8 weeks. That's longer than both of the previous ones combined. Daniel absorbed this without showing what it did to him on the inside, which was something that felt very much like relief, the specific kind that comes when someone you care about has stopped refusing the help they need, and you didn't have to be the one to push them there. He hadn't pushed her. He was clear on that. Something else had the board meeting, or Lily's drawing, or Preston Whitmore's engagement announcement, or all of it together, the accumulated weight of a year that had pressed on something in her until it finally moved. He had just been present for it. He had just stayed in the room. But there was something in knowing she was going. Something in knowing she had decided on her own terms in her own way that she was worth the effort of getting better. The change in her was not dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It arrived the way real changes usually arrive, in small increments that you only recognize as a pattern once you've accumulated enough of them to see the shape. She started leaving the office before 8 p.m. Not every night, but some nights. She would look up from her desk at 7:30 and say, "I'm done for tonight," and leave, and Daniel would cover the remaining correspondence, and that would be that. He never commented on it. He just made sure the evening handoff was seamless, so she didn't have a reason to stay. She started talking to Voss in legal differently, not softer exactly. Charlotte Hayes was never going to be soft, but with a willingness to actually hear pushback that hadn't been there before. He overheard one of their calls where Voss raised a concern about a contract structure, and Charlotte said, "Walk me through your reasoning," and then actually listened and changed her position. He had never heard her change a position in real time before. He'd seen her change her mind, but always privately, always arriving at the next conversation with the new position already formed, never letting anyone see the movement between the two. She was letting people see the movement now. Just a little. Just enough. And she started asking him to stay some evenings after the formal work was done, not to work exactly, but to talk. About the company, initially the way they'd always talked about the company. But then beyond that, about her early years building Hayes Financial, about deals that had gone wrong before they went right, about the investors who'd believed in her at the beginning when there was nothing to believe in except her word and her intensity. He stayed. He listened. He asked questions that were genuine, not professional, and she answered them the same way. One evening late, she said, "Do you ever miss construction?" He thought about it honestly. "I miss the physical part, the way you could see at the end of the day exactly what you'd built. Nothing abstract about it. A beam is either where it belongs or it isn't. That's what I liked about the early days," she said. "When the company was small enough that I could see all of it. Every piece. I knew where everything was because I put it there myself." "You still know where everything is," he said. "It's different when there are 200 people between you and the thing you built." "Yeah," he said. "But the beam is still holding." She looked at him. "You love that metaphor." "I'm a former construction manager. I have a limited range." She almost smiled. He was getting better at predicting when it would come. There was a particular quality of quiet before it, like a held breath. "Go home to your daughter," she said. "It's late. She's at her grandmother's." then go home and sleep like a normal person." "You first?" he said. She gave him a look that was so close to fond, it took him a second to recover from it. "Good night, Daniel," she said. "Good night, Charlotte." The call came on a Thursday morning in February. He was at his desk earlier than usual, 5:30, because there was a Frankfurt conference call at 6 a.m., and he wanted the materials laid out before she arrived. He heard the elevator open, which was unusual at that hour, and assumed it was the overnight security rotation. It wasn't. Charlotte came off the elevator moving differently. He noticed it immediately. Something in the set of her shoulders, something in the pace. She moved past his desk and directly into her office without speaking, which wasn't unusual. But she left the door open, which increasingly was. At 6:15, after the Frankfurt call, he brought her the follow-up notes, and she took them and looked at them, and then she said without looking up, "I stood this morning." He went very still. "In therapy," she said. "Dr. Reeves's office, with the parallel bars." She was quiet for a moment. About 4 seconds, maybe 5. Another pause. Then I sat back down. He didn't say anything right away. He let the information be what it was, enormous and ordinary at the same time, the way the most important things always are. "How did it feel?" he asked. She looked up at him then, and her eyes were bright in the specific way that has nothing to do with tears and everything to do with something coming back to life. "Like the first day I ever came into this building," she said. "Like everything was possible, and I didn't know yet what was going to be hard." He nodded slowly. "That's a good feeling." "Yes," she said. "It is." He set the notepad down on her desk. "Do you want to reschedule the 9 o'clock? "No," she said. "I want to work." "Then let's work," he said. They worked. He told Lily that night. He wasn't sure why it felt like something she should know without him being able to fully articulate the logic. Maybe because Lily had given Charlotte the drawing, and Charlotte had kept it, and there was a line of connection there that felt like it mattered. Lily listened to the story with the focused attention she brought to things she considered important. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "So, she stood up," Lily said. "For a few seconds," he said. "Is she going to walk again?" "The doctors don't know for sure yet, maybe. The fact that she stood, that's already more than some of them thought would happen." Lily thought about this. Then she said, "I think she's going to walk again." "Why do you think that?" "Because she's like you," Lily said, with the simple certainty of someone who has not yet learned to doubt her own instincts. "You don't stop doing things just because they're hard." He looked at his daughter and felt again that wave of something too large to name. He pulled her into a hug that she tolerated for approximately 4 seconds before announcing she needed to finish her drawing, which was what 7 almost 8-year-olds did, and he let her go and sat at the kitchen table and thought about what she'd said. "She's like you. You don't stop doing things just because they're hard." He hadn't thought of it that way. He'd thought of Charlotte as someone fundamentally different from him. Different world. Different resources. Different scale of everything. But Lily, who had no investment in the differences, had gone straight to what was the same. He sat with that for a long time. March arrived, and with it Lily's 8th birthday, which Daniel had been planning quietly for weeks. Not a large party, they weren't in large party territory yet, financially, but something real. A cake from the bakery Lily liked. Her grandmother and 2 friends from school. An afternoon that was just hers. On the morning of Lily's birthday, there was a package on Daniel's desk when he arrived. A flat rectangular box wrapped neatly with a card that had Lily's name on it in Charlotte's handwriting, the same precise rapid script he'd come to know from the margins of documents and the backs of folders. He stared at it for a long moment. He didn't open it. He set it aside and worked the morning, and at noon, when he was leaving to set up for the party, he took the package with him and gave it to Lily at the kitchen table with her grandmother watching from the doorway. Lily unwrapped it with the focused efficiency she brought to all things practical. It was a book. Not a children's book. A real one, thick and illustrated, about the history of horse breeds. Thoroughbreds, Friesians, Arabians, Andalusians. photographs and drawings and histories going back centuries. On the inside cover in Charlotte's handwriting, "For Lily who knows that Frisians are dramatic and that green is the most useful color." C.H. Lily held the book against her chest the same way she'd held her sketchbook the day she came to the office. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, she's my favorite person at your work." "I know," he said. "Don't tell Gerald." Lily laughed, and his mother-in-law laughed in the doorway, and the afternoon was warm and full and uncomplicated, and Laura would have loved every second of it, and he felt both her absence and her presence at the same time, the way he'd learned you could when you stopped trying to make grief be just one thing. It was April when Charlotte stood again, this time for longer. He wasn't there when it happened. It was at her home during her private therapy session with the specialist she'd been working with since January. She told him the next morning in the same matter-of-fact way she'd told him in February, setting it down in front of him like a document that needed to be reviewed. 12 seconds this time, she said. I lost my balance at the end, but I didn't fall. You caught yourself, he said. Yes. That's different from before. Yes, she said again. The therapist says the nerve signals are inconsistent, sometimes strong, sometimes not. It may never be fully reliable. She paused. I've decided I don't care. He looked at her. I don't need it to be reliable, she said. I need it to be possible. That's enough to work with. She picked up the day's schedule. What's first? Henderson at 7:30. He wants to discuss the Q2 projections. Tell him 7:15, she said. I have things to do after. He sent the message to Henderson and made himself a note that said nothing beyond 7:15 because there are things you don't need to write down to remember. The summer came in slowly, the way New York summers do 1 degree at a time, until one morning you walk outside and realize the city has made a decision about the weather without consulting anyone. Daniel had been at Hayes Financial for 11 months. In 11 months he had managed Charlotte Hayes's calendar, coordinated with 6 department heads, survived a board rebellion, reorganized a storage unit, read 4 earnings calls in one night, and been given a cup of water and 2 ibuprofen tablets by his own boss, which had happened quietly once on a Thursday when he'd come in with a tension headache from a bad night, and she'd looked at him across the desk and produced them without a word, and they had never discussed it. In 11 months he had paid off the eviction notice, brought his account current, and started a small savings account with a number in it that wasn't impressive by any objective measure, but that he looked at on his phone, sometimes just to feel solid. Lily had filled an entire sketchbook with horses and started a second one. And Charlotte Hayes had in the therapy room on a Tuesday morning in July taken 7 steps. Not with bars, not with a wall for support. 7 steps with a walker across a therapy room floor before sitting down on the bench at the other end, breathing hard, her hands shaking slightly. Her physical therapist standing nearby with an expression that suggested he was working very hard at professional composure. She told Daniel on the phone. She called him the way she'd called him that first Tuesday evening when she'd gone home and asked about the Hartwell numbers. Except this time, she didn't ask about anything. She just told him. 7 steps, she said. Her voice was steadier than he would have been. He was in the parking garage of a grocery store because it was Saturday, and he'd been getting things for dinner, and his phone had rung, and he'd pulled over between a minivan and a pickup truck and answered it. 7 steps, he said back. The walker isn't permanent, she said. That's what he thinks. The consistency is improving. The nerve signals are... She stopped, took a breath. Daniel, I walked across a room. And there it was. Underneath the precision and the facts and the clinical vocabulary, right there breaking the surface. Not the CEO. Not the composed, controlled woman who ran 42nd floors and faced down board rebellions without blinking. Just Charlotte. Just a person who had spent 4 years being told what she couldn't do and who had just in a therapy room on a Tuesday morning walked across a room. I know, he said. His voice was steady. He made it steady. I know you did. A long silence. I didn't tell anyone else yet, she said. Okay. I called you first. He didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. Some things are exactly what they are, and saying more about them takes something away. "I'll be in Monday at 6, she said finally. "I'll be there at 5:48, he said. She laughed. An actual laugh. Not the almost smile, not the controlled twitch at the corner of her mouth, but a real laugh, short and genuine, and startled out of her like she'd surprised herself with it. "Of course you will," she said. He sat in that parking garage for a few minutes after she hung up. He thought about the morning 11 months ago when he'd sat in his truck in a parking garage not far from here, talking himself out of leaving. The cracked phone screen. The eviction notice in the glove compartment. The blazer from the Goodwill. The elevator doors opening and standing there a moment too long before getting in. He thought about everything between that morning and this one. About a mug hitting a doorframe 2 inches from his head and choosing to sweep up the pieces and ask if she wanted a fresh cup. About Gerald saying she's going to test you harder, and that's the part that's going to scare her. About Lily saying she's like you. You don't stop doing things just because they're hard, with the absolute certainty of someone who sees clearly, because she doesn't yet know to look away. He thought about what Charlotte had said in the therapy room in February when he'd asked how it felt to stand. Like the first day I ever came into this building. Like everything was possible, and I didn't know yet what was going to be hard. He understood that feeling. He was sitting in it right now, because standing wasn't the miracle. Walking across a room wasn't the miracle either, though it was extraordinary, and it was real, and it would keep getting more real with every step that followed. The miracle was subtler and harder to name, and it had happened incrementally across 11 months of early mornings and late evenings, and a horse drawing on the corner of a desk, and a green sweater and ibuprofen left without ceremony, and calls answered on the second ring. The miracle was that Charlotte Hayes had let someone stay. And the miracle was that Daniel Carr, who had walked through a door with nothing but a desperate need and a refusal to quit, had discovered that staying was exactly the thing he was built for. He put the car in drive. He had groceries to bring home. He had a daughter who was probably drawing horses at the kitchen table, and a dinner to make, and a savings account that was small but real, and a job he would be at Monday morning at 5:48, because that was who he was, and that was what he did. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment that had been too quiet for 4 years, Charlotte Hayes was sitting with the knowledge of 7 steps, and the understanding that the distance between who you've been and who you're becoming is sometimes exactly as far as a therapy room floor. And the most extraordinary thing that can happen to a person is not the moment they stand up. It is the moment they realize they no longer have to stand alone.